Welcome into the Grace Point Daily Podcast. My name is Jeremiah Johnson. It's going to be a verse-by-verse edition with Dr. R.B. Maynard. Before we get into it today, thank you for all of you that listen. Please subscribe to the Grace Point Daily Podcast. Support us, whatever platform that you listen to it on. We really appreciate that. And as always, you can now watch it on Facebook Live. See Dr. R.B. Maynard's beautiful face, his wisdom. He's got that look. So anyway, Dr. R.B. Maynard, welcome. Verse by verse.
Thank you. Wisdom highlights, they call this.
We have to, I think my wife tells me this, I guess is kind of true. We have to always throw some under the bus, on every show. And we're going to throw her under the bus. She called you Rick Maynard during her sermon on Sunday night.
I was hurt. Lack of respect, lack of honor.
I'm so proud of myself. I have disciplined myself. The words Rick Maynard are hardly ever in my vocabulary anymore.
I appreciate that.
It's
too.
exclusively Dr. R.B. Maynard.
Yes.
So,
yes.
And Kelly Stevens is even slipping away from me. It's more and more likely Shepins as the day continues on. So
I'm afraid to try to say that to him because I'm afraid I'll get twisted up and maybe say something that doesn't sound very good. So.
Yeah. Well, verse by verse, as we go through the Bible, we're in 1 Kings, and that's what we do. Verse by verse, dig deep. And Dr. R.B. Maynard here gives us all the wisdom, insight, and understanding that maybe you don't get when you just breeze through it. So let's dive into it.
Okay. We're in 1 Kings 18. We read one verse last time, so we'll start with verse 2. It says, "So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria." This is Elijah going to Ahab. Ahab wants to kill Elijah for the famine. He blames him, even though Elijah's only speaking what God told him to speak. But he's mad at the messenger, and he thinks Elijah has the power to change things. So he's angry. So it's pretty brave it's pretty brave of Elijah to even want to come before Ahab. So the famine maybe is more severe here, and it's like I always ask the question: why not just send rain without Elijah going? I mean, we always want to question God. Why would you do it this way? Why put Elijah in a position of danger because Ahab's trying to kill him? Why didn't God just say, "Okay, it's time for it to be over"? But God has a way sometimes that. It's not that he has to prove himself, but he just does. I mean, he just performs miracles. If we didn't have the stories in the Bible that we know came true, the miracles, the prophecies, the Bible would be a little hard to believe. Those stories, I know you just talked about Jonah. That's a pretty wild story if you don't believe everything else in the Bible and all the proven things that we have, then it causes us to say, well, that's got to be true too. If those other stories are true. So sometimes that's just the way God does it. We don't really have an explanation, but it says, "And Ahab had summoned Obadiah," verse 3, "who was in charge of his palace. Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord." And this, they believe that this Obadiah is Obadiah the prophet that we read about later. So I know in the Bible there's lots of people with the same names, but they believe this is that same guy. So 18:4, while Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. So this, I kind of related this. Belinda Stevens works for the bank, and with all the coronavirus, instead of everyone coming to work in the same place and taking the chance of the virus sweeping through and then that whole department is going to be gone, they split them up. I think Belinda moved to the downtown bank so that if they had the virus at the other bank, she wouldn't be affected. She could keep things going there. Or if she got it, the other bank could keep going. So they split it up in order for protection. And I have to wonder here, probably this was like, well, at least if they find these prophets, because they were killing the prophets. I mean, Jezebel was trying to kill all the prophets. So if they find part of them, at least there's another 50 that are going to maybe survive. And this is, we don't even think about the miracle here of Elijah's supplying them with food and water, and this is during a time of famine. And so you have to wonder if we just read about miraculous provision with the oil and the flour that didn't run out. You almost have to wonder if it maybe was kind of the same thing going on, that he's supplying these guys with food and water during a time of famine. So 100 men and taking care of them with food and water. I'd say there's probably some miracles going on there too that we don't have direct information. But Ahab, verse 5, had said to Obadiah, "Go through the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep the horses and mules alive, so we will not have to kill any of our animals." And I just, the idea of a famine, I don't think right now, I saw in the news the other day, we are really considered in a drought right now, even in southwest Missouri. I mean, we're not getting the normal rainfall for what we should have in the fall. I mean, we're not really in fall, but for this time of year.
Yeah.
So we're considered in a drought. I mean, I'm not mowing my yard every week right now.
Right.
I mean, it's just not, it's not growing. Things are dying out. But it's a dry, parched ground, no running water, everything dead, animal skeletons. I mean, they're talking about having to start killing off the animals because they're going to starve to death anyway. So a famine, we think, well, people are going to starve to death in a famine. But what about animals, and what about your pet dog that you have? I mean, the dog going to go first, or the kids are going to go first? I mean, you're going to, and I'm not asking you to answer that question.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you love your
Pug
dog.
sausage, breakfast sausage.
Oh man, you'll get in trouble for that now.
But we refer to that in America, again, a famine, not a word that we're familiar with. We talked about there's programs of the day, this farmers, food to farmers, farmers to food to Americans, and there is so much food in America.
Oh yeah, so much gets thrown away. I mean, can you imagine seeing the dumpsters behind sirloin, all that food that comes off of those buffets, and the food that people leave on their plates? I mean, we don't realize.
No, and a famine is a famine. We're talking Bible, I'm talking famine.
Right. So, and I looked up because just to see some worldwide statistics between 1860 and 2016, 128 million people died in famine. So, I mean, we do still have famines throughout the land. Not necessarily in the United States, but.
Yeah, that was a global statistic, right? Yeah.
But this is just in China from 1959 to 61, so I don't know whether that's a total of 3 years. But anyway, the government said there was 15 million that died. The scholarly estimates say between 15 and 30 million. Some people say there was 45 million that died. So if you look at that, anywhere from 15 million to 45 million. And they said only 30% of that was natural disaster. The rest of it was political. Now, I mean, can you imagine that? Well, we can imagine.
Yes.
We look at what's going on just United States right now, and the control. Yeah. There are shortages. I don't think we have food shortage right now. I mean, you can pretty much get what you want, and you can still go to the restaurants and order. And I mean, I don't think we're there, but I'm in the building trade right now. People can't get materials, and they are like lumber prices are about 2.5 times what they were a couple of months ago. So the prices have gone up, and the availability. I've got right across the street from me, there's a house going up. They don't have the floor joists to put down, so they're out there building this detached garage and doing what they can do because they're waiting on the floor joists because they don't have any. I talked to them at the lumberyard.
Good person to speak to that in our church would be Mitch Boyku, who's a Romanian, grew up in communism, where they literally had to stand in line, and there was limited amounts of food, and you don't get to pick what kind of food you want. It's given to you, and then at times it ran out, and he can take you deep into the severity of communism, but that again was politically controlled, and so there are people that died, maybe not because of they could have maybe got the food, but it was managed, controlled, dictated.
And I can see where your government, if the government takes it away, and you're starving to death, you'll do just about anything to get it back. So when the government starts coming back and saying, well, if you'll do this, you can get food, and if you'll do this, you can get food, and it's that control. And it says the Great Chinese Famine was caused by communist leaders attempting to force change upon an unwilling population. Isn't that? Are we not there right now with all this? Not obviously this severe.
Yes.
But government forcing things on people.
We are not a political show, but we have no problem either saying communism is not good.
Right.
It's bad.
But what they did, the owning of private land was outlawed. Millions of agricultural workers were removed and sent to the factories. So it was, they were sending them to the factories because there was more money to be made for the government by doing that than having people working in the fields. And so it was very political. And the only difference in Elijah's situation, it was a God thing to teach whatever lessons or whatever. But these stories we read about, we don't realize just what, it was a famine during Elijah's time. But just a few things there to make us realize that that could happen easily in the land. God controls. We can say, well, God's burning down California because of all the fires, and we can start blaming God for all these things, and it's God's vengeance on the land. But anyway, verse 6 says, so they divided the land. They were to cover, Ahab going in one direction and Obadiah in another. So they're looking for basically some way to feed the animals is what they're doing. But 18:7, as Obadiah was walking along, Elijah met him. Obadiah recognized him, bowed down to the ground, and said, is it really you, my Lord Elijah? And this is that my Lord as in respect. Not, God, you're like God. It's a respect thing from, basically they're both prophets. It's as one pastor to another pastor, but showing some respect for that because that pastor is, I don't mean to say over you, but maybe in some kind of an authority or whatever. We don't call Lord at this point, but
we call Pastor Greg the Donut Lord every once in a while, but that's a different.
Well, that's kind of the same thing. I never thought of that as being a good illustration, but I guess it is. So they were both prophets, but Elijah and Obadiah have a relationship that Obadiah realizes that, if you would, Elijah is the senior prophet. He is my spiritual mentor, in other words. And so the Midrash, some of the Jewish writings, they talk about Elijah had 4 disciples. In other words, he had 4 guys, just like Jesus had disciples that he taught. There was just because you're a pastor or just because you are a prophet or a teacher or whatever, it all puts, there's still a chain of command, in other words. So just because you're a pastor, there are pastors or leaders in the district offices that, if you were teaching things that were not biblical, against the Assemblies of God doctrine, there are guys that you would answer to. As a teacher in the church, you are my authority. If I should I start calling you Lord Jeremiah?
I'm fine with that.
Yeah. No. I got Dr. RB, so I guess you could be Lord Jeremiah.
Yeah, I don't have a cool name yet.
Man, that's got a kind of a ring to it, Lord Jeremiah. So, but Elisha, we know about Elisha because we have lots of stories, and then Obadiah is here in this scenario. But then Micah the prophet, we have writings of Micah, and they believe Jonah. So we're just talking about that you preached on Jonah a couple of weeks ago, but that Jonah was a disciple, or that he would look up to Elijah, in other words. And we kind of forget about, and I didn't look up the timelines, but we kind of forget about that these guys overlap each other.
Yeah, overlapping.
We always think this guy came along and then he died, and then the next guy came along, and I've got that. I think Rachel has one in the youth room. Adam's chronology, and you forget how many of these guys lived all these years. I love the thought, and I never did think about it till I was 50 years old probably, but the thought that Adam lived 900 years. Think of all the men and women who got to firsthand know the first man.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that, and we would just think, well, they threw him out of the garden and he lived in obscurity the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Well, that's not true. I mean, all of these people that he was, I mean, can you imagine sitting down?
Yeah.
And the guy says, yeah, I was the first man God created out of the dust, you know.
He probably got a lot of bookings, like for parties, speaking engagements.
You would have thought there would have been a book of Adam.
Yeah.
I mean,
True. Very true.
Maybe there was. Maybe we just lost it someplace.
Yeah.
But anyway, 18:8. Yes, he replied, "Go tell your master Elijah is here." Ahab probably needed to be forewarned because he was so angry with Elijah that if Elijah just showed up and knocked on his door one day, he might have killed him on the spot. I don't know. But 18:9, and I love this because these guys who are prophets, I mean, we think, man, Obadiah and Jonah and these guys had to be like God, you know, to be able to, I mean, their names are in the Bible. These are the guys. But it says, Obadiah in verse 9, "What have I done wrong," asked Obadiah, "that you are handing your servant over to Ahab to be put to death?" Just, I mean, he's realizing what kind of hatred there is for Elijah, because he thinks Ahab just going to kill me for being a friend of yours, for being an associate. And I can't help think about, you know, if I talk to somebody about you and they don't like you, am I the kind of guy that's going to be a stand-up guy and say, I think he's an awesome man? Or am I going to be the kind of guy, oh yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, he's kind of got his faults, and you know. But Obadiah's like, well, what have I done wrong? You're going to ask me to stand up for you, and he might kill me. So even Obadiah, he just said, "My Lord," to Elijah, but now he's afraid that because of Elijah, he might lose his life. You know, he might lose his reputation or whatever it is. And I read this, I don't know where, but I wrote this down. It says, "He is my master of necessity. You are my master of choice." In other words, he is my master because he's the king. He is a master. Donald Trump is my master of necessity. He is the president. He is over me, whether I like him, if I hate him. He still is my. I hate to even use that word, my master. But he is the leader or the authority of necessity. But you would be my authority of choice. You know, yeah. I don't have to come to Grace Point and call you my pastor and my leader, my authority over me, but I choose that. So, yeah, that's a good point. So you are my master of choice, if you would. Hopefully, we have a master of choice in choosing Jesus. Amen. You know, yeah. We have a free choice. I don't have to serve God. I don't have to serve Jesus, but I choose to do that. He is not my master of necessity. I mean, yes, it is necessary. Yeah. But nobody forces me to do that. I can choose to believe, to not believe, to have my own life. But and this is Obadiah is, I think, all these guys. We talked about it last time, where it says Elijah was a man just like us. Well, Obadiah is a man just like us too. I mean, our first thought usually when we have something terrible, not every time, you know, every time something happens, well, what have I done wrong to deserve this? But usually the big things, I mean, maybe a death in the family or a disease or something like that, and our first response, well, what have I done to deserve this? And we'll find even, we'll read on, but we'll find even with Obadiah, he begins to say, I'm a good person. You know, I mean, it's that idea that we somehow believe, and And I get it, because we have so many preachers out there with a prosperity message that everything is always going to work out good for you.
Right.
All things work together for good. We think that means in this life,
Yes.
in the next 30 days, oh, I know this bad thing happened, but God's got a blessing coming in the mail, you know, and we just don't know that. And if you're, I don't understand how you can preach that message and not look around and see godly people. We talked about how many people are martyred. The disciples who left everything to follow Jesus were all martyred but one. I mean, men were sawn in two, and I mean, it's just all these things that have happened to godly people.
Yeah.
They were beaten. Paul talks about being beaten and shipwrecked and all of those things that happen. There is no guarantee that living for God on this earth is going to end up good. And so, you know, for us to say, well, what have I done wrong? Like God's blessing me because none of us live a life to deserve the blessings of God.
Yeah.
So how do we, if you're saying, what have I done wrong, then you must think you've been doing so good that God's been rewarding you.
Yeah, and with we've watched movies since I've been here as a pastor. One of them, a missions movie, we're talking about the Chinese church, the underground church, that those pastors, they viewed it as a blessing to go to jail for Jesus, as if like, now I'm worthy of the calling. Now I have attained a greater spirituality because of my persecution, you know, where we don't like that. We don't want to own that perspective in America because it's not pleasing.
Right. I just went to a funeral last week for I won't go into the whole story, but for a lady who was, served God her whole life, had done, I don't know if you've heard of Cleansing Streams, she was one of the big leaders in Cleansing Streams.
It's like a counseling.
Right.
Oh,
and
okay, yeah.
They have, well, I don't even know what we were related to today. But anyway, just all involved in the church. A godly woman her whole life. And at about 50 years old, 52 years old, somewhere along there, started developing Alzheimer's and died at 65 years old. And we would say, like Obadiah, and I don't know that she said the words, but I'm sure there's times when you're angry at God, when you're having to take care of her and change her and all the things, watching her slowly deteriorate. Alzheimer's is a horrible death for people. And to have to watch that, I'm sure you're like, Lord, what have I done to deserve this? And after all I've done, this is what I get. And that's what happens here. But okay, lost. 18:10, as surely as the Lord your God lives, there is not a nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to look for you. And whenever a nation or kingdom claimed you were not there, he made them swear they could not find you. Just don't, it's kind of like don't kill the messenger here. And you've been on America's Most Wanted. You're wanted throughout the, the land. Everybody, it doesn't tell us that, but there was probably a reward for turning Elijah in. And if somebody asked and they said, well, no, I haven't seen him, they would make you swear on oath that you had not seen him. It wasn't enough just to say, no, I haven't seen him anywhere. But verse 11 and 12, but now you tell me to go to my master and say, Elijah is here. I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave you. If I go and tell Ahab and he doesn't find you, he will kill me. Yet I, your servant, have worshipped the Lord since my youth. There it is. You're asking, I have served God since I was a young man, and now you're asking me to do this? And this is a little bit of a, there's some comment on this that maybe Obadiah had a little bit of a insight, because it says, I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave. We know that Elijah was carried off, he didn't die. He was carried off in a chariot of fire. Maybe this was a little bit of an insight. I don't know where the Lord may carry you. was he talking about, miraculously, or was he talking about, well, I don't know, what if you're not here when I come back? It's almost like, I know you're telling me to go tell him, but what if I tell him and then I come back and you're not here? Then he's going to kill me. I mean, he's still concerned about his own life. And then he makes that statement, yet I, your servant, have worshiped the Lord since my youth. I mean, isn't that where, we've talked about it. I always say I was born saved. I feel like that sometimes because, you talk about in your life, you had that moment of salvation, where God changed your life. I don't really have that. I kind of have maybe at about 8 years old, I kind of remember one time the preacher talking about end times, and that was back when the big deal with flying saucers and aliens and all that kind of stuff, and he was kind of relating those things almost like a scare tactic, and I remember just crying, and I don't know if that was my moment of salvation or if I was just scared to death, but I don't have that conversion moment in my life like a lot of people. So I'm a little bit like Obadiah. I'd be the one who would, Lord, I've served you since the day I was born. I mean, I've had some hiccups along the way, but Lord, I'm faithful. I've been, we've talked about, I've been in this church my whole life. This is my church, and like that should gain me some kind of special privilege. But I know, and that tomorrow something could happen in my life that I'd be the Obadiah saying, well, Lord, I've served you my whole life, and now this is what I get for it.
Yeah.
So
I mean, if Jesus doesn't come back and you happen to die, we'll have LMA come speak at your funeral.
Yeah.
Well, he was inconsistent a couple times. I was a little more consistent.
Yeah, I was more consistent. We don't want to build him up too much because he did miss it. He had little gaps in there, but he's got a lot of boldness to speak to Elijah like that. I mean, Elijah's supposed to be his mentor, but he's like, I can't believe you're asking me to do this, and he just called him Lord, but then it's like, oh, wait a minute here. Now you might be going a little too far, but. I don't deserve this. I should be treated better after all I've done. And I've told this story before, and I never mentioned the name. I think the guy probably is passed on by now. But we had a Heaven's Gate, Hell's Flames event here at the church one time, and they were asking people to park up on the top lot and save the bottom lot for handicapped and some of the elderly or whatever. And when they asked him to do that, by God, I practically paid for this church, and he backed out and left. I mean, it's like, there are those people out there who believe that there's some type of ownership here. I mean, I joke about it in my, I have my pew, I have my place I sit. You better not sit in my place. You better not park in my spot. But that's a joke. I really don't have that kind of attitude or ownership here. But there are people, this guy was one of them, that thought that I should be able to park wherever I want. I'm privileged because I've given so much money to this church in the past. I should, and I thought
God bless him.
Yeah. I wonder if he got a special spot in heaven when he died. You've been a good man. Here's your place. So anyway, we shouldn't make fun of people, but that's what we do.
Yep.
But in the story of the hired servants, and we won't read this, but it's in Matthew 21 through 16, and it's talking about the guy who went to work early in the morning, the guy who went to work at noon, the guy who went to work at 3 o'clock, the guy who went to work at 5 o'clock, and then they all got paid the same, and the guy who went to work first threw a big old fit. Well, why? I worked all day, but you gave this guy the same amount of money. And I love this statement because this is a parable of the hired servants, but it's talking about Jesus himself is the landowner. And he makes a statement at the very end. He says, don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? And I think that's a statement that he would make to us, not being cruel to us, but sometimes the girl with Alzheimer's, the cancer patients, the babies that, all these different scenarios that we have of people dying, I think sometimes, and I don't think God, I've always said God's a big boy, he can take it, but I think sometimes his answer to us is just simply the answer, don't I have the right to do? How is it that you think that you can question me, God, in this area? How do you think, don't I own it all? Don't I own your life? Don't I own the life of the person with Alzheimer's? Don't I own the life of that infant that died? Don't I own all those things? We say it, but then when God takes it, we start claiming ownership over it. And I think sometimes, especially for those who are just constantly, well, I deserve better than this, and I shouldn't have to suffer, and my family shouldn't have to suffer, and we go on and on and on. I think sometimes God would just say, how is it that you think I don't have a right to do what I do? And some people say, well, God doesn't do it, he allows it, which to me is this. I've always said it's the same thing, whether you do it or allow it. If I kill someone, I did it. If I stood there and watched you kill someone and didn't do anything, I believe I'm just as guilty whether I did it or allowed it. And so I'm not saying God is guilty of things, but I'm just saying that God has a right to do what he wants to do. And it's okay, for us to question things. I mean, I question God constantly, and God answers, usually in the Word. I find the answer someplace to things. And then other things, the Bible does say to not argue about unanswerable questions. There are some things we're just not going to know, and we need to leave it alone and trust him to say, don't I have the right to do with what I want to do? He was talking about money here, but it's a principle of I have the right to do what I want to do because I own it all to begin with. So we better wrap it up right there.
Yeah, there you go, verse by verse. Dr. R.B. Maynard, we're in 1 Kings chapter 18, so keep trucking along with us on the journey. We thank you for listening. We'll talk to all of you guys next time.